Hello students. Nice seeing you again. Sit tight as we journey into the feeding habits. Before we proceed, let's do a recap of what we studied in our last class. In our class, we explored the feeding mechanism in animals, such as the absorbing mechanism, biting and chewing mechanism, sucking mechanism, grinding mechanism, and trapping and absorbing mechanism. Let's move to today's lesson. First, let's see the lesson objectives. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to 1. Define feeding habits. 2. Understand the categories of feeding habits. Now, let's explain the feeding habits. Feeding habits describe what an organism eats, what it prefers, and its feeding behavior. There are different categories of feeding habits in organisms, such as filter feeding, fluid feeding, insect feeding, parasitic feeding, and saprophytic feeding. First, let's begin with the filter feeding. Animals that exhibit this kind of feeding are also known as filter feeders. They are aquatic animals that feed on tiny organisms surrounding them. They move on water through a sieve-like structure on their body to collect enough quantity of their prey, which is their food. Examples are hydra, mosquito larvae, etc. A hydra is an aquatic animal that uses its tentacles to capture tiny particles floating in the water. The tentacles have sticky cells that help trap food, which is then moved to the mouth for digestion. Then the mosquito larvae are the aquatic, worm-like immature stage of mosquitoes that hatch from eggs laid in water. This stage is part of the mosquito life cycle and is crucial for their development before they become adults capable of flying and biting. They feed on tiny microorganisms like algae, bacteria, and organic matter in the water. They use brush-like structures around their mouths to sweep food particles into their mouths. The next category of feeding habit is fluid feeding. Animals that feed on any fluid substances are classified as fluid feeders. They often rely on sugary substances like nectar or other dissolved nutrients. Fluid feeders are mainly insects. Examples are butterflies, mosquitoes, houseflies, and the rest. I believe you can recall what we discussed in our last class about the feeding mechanism of these organisms. We discussed that under sucking mechanisms. Let's move to the third feeding habit, which is insect feeding. These are animals that eat insects as their main source of food. Examples are frogs, bats, and so on. Frogs are well-known insect feeders. They use their long, sticky tongues to catch flying insects like mosquitoes, and so forth. Then, insect-eating bats feed on beetles and mosquitoes at night. We will look at parasitic feeding. Parasitic feeding is found in both plants and animals. Parasites are organisms that live on or inside other living organisms for their food and survival. Animal parasites are tapeworms, roundworms, and others. While plant parasites are mistletoe, dodder, and so forth. They are always attached to other plants for survival. Now, we will move on to saprophytic feeding. Saprophytic feeders are organisms that obtain their nutrients by feeding on dead or decaying organic matter. They are mainly non-green plants with no chloroplast and, therefore, cannot produce their own food. Examples are mushrooms, rhizopus, and many others. They have hyphae instead of roots through which they pour out digestive enzymes. They are capable of digesting food outside the body cells of plants. Then, the digested portion of the food is later reabsorbed into the body. Before we wrap up today's lesson, let's look at the feeding habits in protozoa. Protozoa like amoeba exhibits a holozoic mode of feeding. Holozoic feeding is a type of nutrition in which an organism eats, digests, and absorbs complex organic food substances before eliminating waste. Amoeba feeds on microorganisms. It catches the food by putting out its pseudopodia, which surround the food particle by forming a cup shape, making the two ends of the pseudopodia meet. When the two ends meet, it encloses the food into the body with a little drop of water. This helps to form a food vacuole. Then the food is digested inside the food vacuole. That's it for today. Well done, everyone. Please attempt the following classwork. 1. What are feeding habits? 2. List and explain the categories of feeding habits in some organisms. Now, let's look at what we've learned in today's class. We defined feeding habits. Then we explored categories of feeding habits. We have come to the end of the digestive system and the feeding habits and mechanisms of animals. In our next class, we will discuss transport system. Thanks for your time. See you in our next class.